So parents, if your son has made it past the initial month of withdrawal from pornography, well, I want you to take a collective deep breath right now. Seriously, let it out. Phase one, those first 30 days, is a brutal, volatile storm. It's full of mood swings, defensive walls, and raw survival. But as he crosses that 30-day threshold, something beautiful happens. The healing becomes tangible. Welcome to phase two, the early rewiring phase. And phase two ranges days 30 to about day 90. We call it the early rewiring phase. And during this 60-day window, his brain is doing some incredible heavy lifting behind the scenes. Up until now, his dopamine receptors have been severely desensitized, completely blasted by a digital tidal wave of hyperstimulation. Around day 30, the brain finally realizes that the tidal wave isn't coming back. So takes off those metaphorical noise canceling headphones. In clinical terms, it begins to upregulate. It increases the sensitivity and the actual number of its dopamine receptors, and slowly the real world starts to taste good to him again. You might notice laughing at a joke or making eye contact or showing interest in old hobbies. But I need to give you a gentle, direct reality check here. This is not the time for parents to step back. Phase two is a hyper vulnerable transition. His brain is hungry for connection, but it's still highly fragile. So how you show up as a parent during these next 60 days determines whether this neurological rewiring actually sticks or whether he falls into the tolerance trap. So let's talk about how to build a scaffold that will protect his recovery. So we know in the first few weeks, your primary job was simple crisis management, helping him survive the raw cravings and the irritability. In phase two, our clinical focus has to shift entirely toward creating radical relational safety. To understand why this is non-negotiable, we have to look at what is happening in his heart and mind. In my clinical practice, I see one massive hidden engine driving a boy's distress, and it's something that we'll call moral incongruence. Moral incongruence is the agonizing internal conflict between persons' deeply held values and their compulsive behavior. So your son likely has a good heart. He has values, morals, and a vision of who he wants to be, but his compulsive behaviors completely contradict those values. And this friction breeds a toxic, paralyzing level of shame. And shame makes boys do two things: isolate and become deceptive. He's not lying to hurt you. He's lying because he cannot bear the weight of his own self-loathing. If he feels that a slip up or even just an honest admission of a heavy trigger, if he'll be met with parental panic or tears or anger or lectures, he will immediately take the struggle back underground. So what does your role look like now? Well, it means reacting to disclosures with calm validation rather than interrogation. When your son walks into the kitchen and says, "Hey, I had a massive trigger today at school," and he meets a steady, non-judgmental parent who says, "Thank you for telling me. That takes massive courage, and I'm right here for you." Something miraculous happens. The emotional weight of that craving instantly drops. You have just co-regulated his nervous system, keeping his brain out of a panic response. Safety is the ultimate antidote to shame. So parents, now we are building that emotional safety. We have to pair it with a clear, predictable structure. So let's be honest, relying on sheer willpower alone during the rewiring phase is a recipe for absolute exhaustion for your son. His brain gets tired. This is where evidence-based outcome tools become vital. And in our work, we highly recommend utilizing the structured frameworks like the Recovery Toolbox for Teens, which is developed by therapy associates and includes Breaking Free Workbook, 101 Tips for Quitting Porn Workbook, and the Parent Breaking Free Workbook. And these tools, they're not punishment tools. They provide a shared shame-free blueprint for your home. One of the most practical tools in this toolbox is what we call the color-coded status board, which uses a simple green is a good day, yellow is struggling or triggered, and red is a high risk, crisis, or relapse. Think about how hard it is for a 14 or 15 or 17-year-old boy to find the words for an awkward, emotionally heavy conversation about his internal vulnerabilities. It's It's nearly impossible, but the status board fixes that. He can simply update his status to yellow or green or red. No big speeches required, and you see it. You know his internal vulnerability level is elevated, and you know how to support him without hovering. We also implement relapse tracking and real-time assessment. And if a relapse happens, and slips do happen in phase 2, we change the family narrative. We shift the focus away from getting caught or moral failure, and we treat it strictly as data. We look at the charts together. What happened at 4 p.m. on Tuesday? Were you lonely? Were you bored? Was a device left in your room past a boundary line? And we use the data to identify the broken boundary or the unmanaged emotional trigger, adjust the scaffolding, and then move forward without losing ground to shame. Well, parents, the third critical strategy for phase 2 is actively dopamine mapping his environment. So remember, his brain is hungry right now. It is actively looking to rebuild its baseline dopamine levels. And because of that hunger, the adolescent brain is incredibly susceptible to what we call algorithmic hijacking. Clinical practice shows us that a teen boy's brain doesn't just crave pornography, it craves the fast-paced, unpredictable reward systems that mirror the exact same neurochemical pathways. And as a parent, you have to watch for these cross triggers, things like infinite scrolling on social media feeds or video game mechanics like loot boxes or gacha pulls or battle passes, hypersexualized gaming characters or digital spaces. These digital loops tap into the exact same variable reward centers in the brain as porn. So if he's spending 5 hours a day infinite scrolling or chasing digital dopamine drops in video games during phase 2, well, he's quietly priming his brain for a pornography relapse. The pathways stay inflamed. So you cannot simply subtract a toxic coping mechanism. You must add a healthy tactile replacement. You cannot leave a vacuum in a teenager's life. We have to proactively help them map out real-world dopamine producers, things that require physical effort and tangible reality. Things like competitive sports or heavy weight training, which naturally regulates cortisol and increases dopamine, or learning a tangible instrument like the guitar or drums, doing outdoor adventures, hiking, building things with his hands. His brain needs to relearn a fundamental law of nature. True reward comes from effort and time, not from a click on a glass screen. Well, now I want to speak directly to the families who are trying all this but feel stuck. And we know for many young men, outpatient therapy, even the recovery toolbox for teens workbooks, family therapy, and structured boundaries at home, well, they're exactly what the brain needs to successfully rewire. But for others, the digital environment at home is simply too loud. The neural habits too deeply entrenched, the relational patterns locked, or co-occurring traumas require a complete biological and environmental hard reset. So if your son is caught in a chronic, painful cycle of brief compliance, maybe 3 days or a week of doing well, followed by explosive relapses, intense deception, and extreme emotional volatility, it means his nervous system is overwhelmed. And an intensive outdoor intervention may be required. And this is the specific work that we do at Starguide's Wilderness Therapy. We specialize in adolescent males dealing with compulsive digital and sexual behavior issues by removing the constant intrusive noise of smartphones, tablets, high-speed internet, and placing these young men in the rugged, distraction-free environment of the desert of southern Utah. Well, their brains are given the space for an accelerated, natural neurochemical reset. The constant pacing stops, but it's not just about removing technology. We utilize a profound experiential modality like our daily group processing, twice weekly individual therapy sessions, weekly family therapy sessions, and mastery of primitive survival skills. And in that space, away from screens and judgment, the defensive armor of shame and isolation begins to crack. And we teach these young men how to translate their deepest internal struggles into healthy, vulnerable, face-to-face communication. And ultimately, that is what allows them to return home and to restore the exact family trust that the addiction fractured in the first place. So parents, please hear me on this. Phase 2 is a beautiful but fragile season of reclamation. Your son's brain, it's not permanently broken. It is actively working around the clock right now to heal itself. But it cannot do it in midair. It needs a secure, steady scaffold to grow on, and you as the parent are that scaffold. So by pairing structured shame-free strategies from tools like the Recovery Toolbox for Teen Workbooks with a household climate of radical relational safety, you aren't just policing his behavior, you are actively partnering in his neurological resurrection. So stay steady, stay calm, don't lose heart. The light is coming back into his eyes. Parents, if you found the video helpful, please hit the subscribe button, share it with the parent who might be struggling as well. And if you want to learn more about our structured tools, the Recovery Toolbox for Teens, or the wilderness intervention work that we do at Star Guides, we'll visit the links in the description box below. Parents, thank you for joining me today. I'm Matt Bulkley, and I will see you in the next video.